Let's talk about a 9-digit number that you've probably never heard of, but it allows millions of people to participate in the U.S. economy. Today, we're going to break down exactly what this number is, how it works, and why it's so incredibly important.
So let's kick things off with a really fundamental question, one that millions of people living and working in the United States have to figure out every single year. You see, if you're required by law to pay federal taxes on the money you've earned, but you're not eligible for a Social Security number, how in the world do you actually do it? Well, the answer is something called an ITIN, which stands for Individual Taxpayer Identification Number. And today, we're going to cover the whole shebang. What it is, how you get one, the financial doors it can open, what it's not used for, and the very real-world risks involved. Okay, let's dive right in. What exactly is an ITN? You know, it's this critical piece of the whole U.S. tax system that honestly most people have never even heard of. So, the IRS rolled out the ITN way back in 1996. And the logic behind it was pretty simple, really. The law says all wage earners have to pay federal taxes, no matter their immigration status. The ITN was created to give people who can't get an SSN, like undocumented immigrants, or maybe some student visa holders, or even foreign investors, a way to follow the law. Now, if you just glanced at them, an ITIN and a Social Security number might look kind of similar, but they are fundamentally different. The easiest way to spot the difference? An ITIN always starts with a number 9. And while the Social Security Administration hands out SSNs for employment, the IRS issues ITINs for one main reason, and one reason only: tax reporting. That's it. That's the core distinction you have to remember. Okay, so that's what it is. But how does somebody actually get one? Well, the application journey involves some really specific steps, and you guessed it, a whole lot of paperwork. The whole process really boils down to these 4 key steps. It all kicks off with a specific IRS form, which then has to be attached to a completed tax return. And you have to include proof of who you are before you send the whole package off for review. And this is where it all starts. This document right here, Form W-7. It's the official application. But here's a really important detail. Since 2003, you can't just fill this out and send it in by itself. Nope. It has to be physically attached to a valid, fully completed federal tax return. So next, you have to prove you are who you say you are, and the IRS is super specific about this. They only accept 13 types of documents. A foreign passport is the only one that can do the job by itself. Otherwise, you're looking at a combination of at least 2 other documents. And here's the part that's pretty nerve-wracking for a lot of people. You have to mail in the original documents or officially certified copy. And how long does all this take? Well, after you've mailed your tax return and your super important original documents, you have to be patient. The current IRS processing time is about 9 to 11 weeks. And they say if you don't get your documents back within 14 weeks, then you can call a special number to see what's going on. And after all that waiting, you might be expecting, a little card in the mail, like a Social Security card. But nope. The IRS actually stopped issuing those wallet-sized cards way back in 2003 because it was causing too much confusion. Instead, what you get is an official letter confirming your brand new 9-digit tax processing number.
So you've done it. You've navigated the whole application, you've waited for weeks, and now you have that ITIN assignment letter in your hands. So what now? What doors does this little 9-digit number actually open? Turns out, quite a few.
So yeah, obviously you can now file your taxes and claim refunds. But over the years, the IT-9 has become this really critical tool for financial inclusion. A lot of banks and credit unions now have programs that let ITIN holders open checking and savings accounts, start building a credit history, and even apply for things like car loans, personal loans, and credit cards.
And we're not talking about some tiny niche program here. In 2019 alone, the IRS got over 2.5 million tax returns from people using an ITN. And get this, those returns added up to a net contribution of $5.8 billion to the U.S. economy. That's a huge economic impact.
And for people on an individual level, the impact can be absolutely life-changing. I mean, take the story of Armando. He's an electrician who used an ITIN to file several years of back taxes. And because he'd never claimed any of his withholdings, he got a massive refund, $17,000, which he turned right around and used as a down payment to buy a home for his family. But, and this is a really big but, to get the full picture, it's just as important to understand what an ITIN is not. And this is where a ton of misconceptions come into play.
This is it. This is the single most important distinction you have to get. An ITIN is for tax reporting on income you've already earned. It does not, in any way, shape, or form, give you authorization to earn that income.
It's so important to remember these limits. An ITNI is a tax tool, period. It does not grant you work authorization. It doesn't make you eligible for Social Security benefits. It won't qualify you for certain tax credits like the Earned Income Tax Credit, and it has absolutely zero effect on your immigration status. Okay, and this brings us to what's probably the most complicated part of this whole story. The very real risks and the serious concerns that people have to weigh when they're deciding whether or not to apply.
So, legally speaking, the IRS has some really strong privacy protections. There's this law, Internal Revenue Code Section 6103, and it's a powerful one. It generally forbids the agency from sharing taxpayer info with pretty much anyone, and that includes other government agencies like immigration enforcement.
However, and you knew there was a however coming, those protections aren't a solid brick wall. There are specific legally defined exceptions. For example, information can be shared with certain Treasury officials for tax purposes, or if a federal court orders the IRS to hand it over as part of a criminal investigation that isn't about taxes. And this tension, this fear, is captured perfectly in the words of Juan, an immigrant from Peru. He files his taxes, but he says his husband doesn't, because he's terrified it could expose him to immigration officials. It really highlights the difficult choice so many people face. Do you comply with tax law, or do you try to protect your personal information from what you see as a huge risk?
And one last thing you should know, an ITIN isn't permanent if you don't use it. You have to file a tax return at least once every 3 years in a row to keep it active. If you don't, the number just expires.
So what is an ITIN in the end? Well, at its core, sure, it's a tax processing number. But in the real world, it's so much more than that. It's a bridge that lets millions of people meet their legal tax obligations. It's a system that brings them into the financial fabric of the country. And it's a key that can unlock everything from a bank account to a home loan, all while existing in this really complex, often debated space right between tax law and immigration policy.